but Havlicek steals it. Havlicek stole the ball. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier. Down goes Frazier.
United to Amici. Amici powers in.
Won their 6th NBA championship.
Gibson, swing. This is gonna be a home run. Unbelievable! I don't believe what I just saw.
For 6 years, Sandy Koufax was all too human, winning fewer games than he lost. Then, from 1961 to 1966, he was without equal. He led the league in strikeouts 4 times, had the lowest ERA 5 times. He pitched 4 no-hitters, won 129 games, and 3 Cy Young Awards. All this before arthritis forced him to retire at age 30. Since then, he has protected his privacy the same way he protected a lead, fiercely and with an uncompromising dignity.
I don't have much to say. I just have one short statement, and I'll try and answer any questions that anybody has. A few minutes ago, I sent a letter to Buzzy asking him to put me on the voluntary retirement list.
He was like the meteor. He came across and was so bright in his heyday, and then the fires went out so fast.
You feel sorry for him, but in a way, you also feel sorry for yourself as a fan. I mean, I felt shortchanged. It just made me sick that I wouldn't be able to watch Koufax pitch again.
This was 72-point headline stuff anywhere in the country. Sandy Koufax wasn't just an LA hero. The whole country loved Sandy Koufax.
I don't regret 1 minute of the last 12 years, but I think I would regret 1 year that was too many.
It's a rare athlete that will leave before his time simply because he knows he can't perform up to the standards that he set for the fans.
No one else in baseball history has ever won 20 games in his last season and then retired. Koufax won 27. No one in the century retired after striking out 200 batters in his last season. Koufax retired after striking out 317.
When he quit, his record was still sensational his last season, but the pain was equally sensational.
I was getting cortisone shots with pretty good regularity, and I just feel like I don't want to take a chance on completely disabling myself.
It insulted him to think that playing baseball was going to leave him with a hand or arm that couldn't do the things that normal people could do. That's the thought of somebody who does not see themselves essentially as an athlete, but as themselves.
What is your thought about the loss of income? Well, the loss of income, let's put it this way. If there were a man who did not have use of one of his arms, and you told him it would cost a lot of money and he could buy back that use, he'd give him every dime he had, I believe.
If Sandy Koufax surprised the baseball world with his retirement in 1966, the greater secret was the deep, debilitating pain he had been feeling for 3 seasons.
I met Koufax at the All-Star game in '66. I went into the clubhouse, and Koufax was sitting with his left arm in a tub of ice water. I never saw an arm swollen that badly. He saw the alarm on my face. He said, "Don't worry, it always does this after I pitch, you know."
That's the first time I ever heard of ice being a miracle drug. Not only did he play in pain, but he rested in pain.
There were times when Sandy couldn't comb his hair. There were times he had to shave his face with his right hand rather than his left hand because his left elbow hurt him so much he couldn't raise his hand to his face.
It got to the point where he said, "Hell, I'm not going to be a cripple the rest of my life." And he just gave it up.
This was a guy who threw every pitch as hard as he could. Every pitch was a fastball or a sharp-breaking curveball. He wound up really giving his arm for the Dodgers.
The extent of the pain that he took and endured was just incredible. You had the ice, you had the heat treatments, He was taking these orange pills, anti-inflammatory pills, that made him sick to his stomach.
I never missed a start, and started a lot of games with 2 days rest, and, couldn't believe it, but the medical staff, the trainers, the doctor, they got me through it.
Got a lot of years to live after baseball, and I would like to live them with complete use of my body.
The news conference itself was one of the most moving news conferences I've ever attended in 40-some years of doing this kind of stuff on television and radio.
All the writers in the room stood up and they applauded, and they gave him an ovation. And it takes a lot to move writers the way that Sandy Koufax did like that.
He was more than Sandy Koufax. He was a baseball player, and he wanted to excel at what he did. So much so that in September of '66, when he went to Walter Alston and said, "Skip, don't worry about me, just throw me out there as much as you can." Because Sandy had already known he was retired, but he was gonna go out with both barrels blazing.
Here's the pitch. It's a strike call. He struck him out.
In 1966, his last year in baseball, there was one stretch. He threw 8 straight complete games, and one of those games, they beat the Mets by a score of 15-3, and Koufax pitched the entire game.
He was a complete game pitcher. None of this 7 games, 6.5 innings.
It was sort of a badge of honor to take the ball every 4 days and even occasionally every 3 days. Unless your arm was absolutely broken, you were going to take your start.
Here he comes, the 2-2 pitch. Swung on him, missed, he struck him out.
I personally look back on it and wonder, what did the Dodgers know? I mean, did they know they were putting this guy at risk? He pitched the last game in the Los Angeles Coliseum, a meaningless game, and threw 205 pitches.
For Koufax, no game was meaningless.
The regular season, dominant. In the big games, dominant. In the World Series, even better.
Over 57 innings in the Fall Classic, Koufax struck out 61 and compiled a record 0.95 ERA.
There are some pitchers who shy away from those moments. He lived for them. That's why I do what I do, to go out there and have the ball in my hand when it matters the most. He loved that. I mean, that was his drug.
Some historian wrote a book. The name of the book was The 100 Most Influential Jews of All Time. And it had Einstein at the top, and Jesus Christ, and Moses. And there was one athlete, only one athlete on the list. And the athlete was Sandy Koufax.
Nothing contributed more to Koufax's place in social history than his following the footsteps of Hank Greenberg, who in 1934 chose not to play on Yom Kippur. The difference was that Koufax elected not to start Game 1 of the 1965 World Series.
The Day of Atonement is the most sacred day of the Jewish year. It's a 24-hour fast from sunset to sunset, and the Jew stays in the temple the entire day.
He wanted baseball to respect a Jewish holiday as much as baseball would respect Christian holidays.
He believed in what he was doing. A lot of people say, I believe in this, but when it comes to paying the price, will not pay the price.
To celebrate his own Judaism. Here I am, a proud Jew who's not even going to play a baseball game because of a Jewish holiday. Wow, the Jews were applauding in the streets.
I was still in high school in '65. Jewish kid from New York. I mean, we didn't have many Jewish sports idols. And here was Sandy making this statement. I'm thinking, how cool is this?
There was no hard decision for me. It was just a thing of respect. I wasn't trying to make a statement, and I had no idea that it would impact that many people.
I wanted him to pitch, damn it. I didn't want him to sit out. I was a Dodger fan. I wanted Koufax to pitch.
After the Dodgers lost Game 1 with Don Drysdale on the mound, Koufax gave up just 1 earned run in 6 innings of Game 2. But Los Angeles was beaten 5-1.
I don't think I ever heard a player saying, damn him, why didn't he play?
Now, if we'd have lost in 7, it might have been different.
You know, I don't think Sandy saw it as any added pressure for himself because he knew in his heart he did what he had to do.
After the Dodgers tied the series at 2, Koufax pitched brilliantly in Game 5, throwing a shutout while fanning 10 Twins.
They go back to Minnesota. Game 6, the Twins win. Now it's Game 7. It's Drysdale's turn. Drysdale won 23 games that year.
Don Drysdale is ready on 3 days rest to pitch Game 7. And Walter Alston sends Drysdale to the bullpen and pitches Koufax on 2 days rest against a Minnesota lineup that had plenty of good right-handed hitting in it.
This is Vin Scully, ready to bring you all the action of the 7th and deciding game of the 1965 World Series. The big guessing game is over. Sandy Koufax is the Dodger pitcher. Jim Cox for Minnesota.
In Game 7, our really only hope was that because he was coming back on 2 days rest, that he just wasn't going to have much or wasn't going to be able to go.
If he hadn't had it and he had been knocked out, Walter Alston would have been criticized for not starting Don Drysdale, but Koufax's record with the pennant on the line or the World Series on the line was just staggering.
Koufax so far has not been relying as much on the curveball, to my way of thinking, as he did his last time out. Base hit.
We know this is Sandy Koufax, but this is also a great Minnesota Twins team with hitters like Killebrew, Oliva, Bobby Allison, and he's trying to get by on one pitch.
Koufax threw 4 innings. Does not have much of a curveball. He's been doing it with fastball.
Leading 2-0 in the bottom of the 5th, Koufax's curveball was still among the missing.
And I went out and I said, "Hey, Sam," I called him Sam. I said, "Damn, what's happened with the curveball?" And he says, "Rose, I just don't have it." I said, "Well, what the are we going to do?" He says, "Blow him away." That's what we did. We just got back here and
Fastball got him. That's the pitch.
Among Koufax's strikeout victims was American League batting champion Tony Oliva.
He threw me 5 fastball in a row. Boom, boom, boom. I can't believe it. He threw a fastball bite to me 5 times in a row and never touched the ball.
I almost felt bad for our hitters because we had a great hitting ball club, and it was like a big leaguer against a little leaguer. They had no chance.
2-0 the Dodgers. It's the last of the 9th. Killebrew is on first with 1 out. Strike 3. Batty caught looking. Ball 2, strike 2, 2 out. Dodgers leading 2-0. He did it. Sandy Koufax gets his 10th strikeout. Every pitcher, of course, likes to finish a game with a strikeout. This was, of course, not a game. This was the 7th game of the World Series.
Here's the fella who gave the Dodgers the championship. Sandy, in Los Angeles, when you pitched your 7-0 shutout, you were quoted as saying after the game, "I feel 100 years old." So today, how do you feel?
101.
101.
I feel great, Benny. I know I don't have to go out there anymore for about 4 months.
That final game of the '65 World Series, he was pitching with 2 days rest, and his elbow was so bad he couldn't straighten it out. And he went out there and pitched a 2-0 shutout.
This man was out on a mission. When he's on a mission, he's going to beat you.
Every single Jewish kid I grew up with in New York revered Sandy Koufax and thought that it was something very important, very significant that he didn't pitch on a high holiday. But then that he came back on 2 days rest eventually to pitch Game 7 and stick the bats right up the Minnesota Twins' rear end. There wasn't a Jewish kid that I knew who didn't get a lift out of what that represented.
Born in Brooklyn in 1935, the life of Sanford Braun changed dramatically when his father Jack left the family.
His parents split when he was 3 years old. He never really got a chance to know his biological father and had no interest in knowing him either. His mother, Evelyn, remarried later when he was 9 years old, and in fact, he took the name of his stepfather, Koufax.
He was adopted by a man named Irving Koufax. Sandy was devoted to this man and vice versa.
His mother was a lot like Sandy, the fact that she didn't say a whole lot. She was very reserved and quiet. There was a story where Time magazine once sent a reporter over to the house to do a story on the Koufax family, and the gentleman was there all evening and walked out of there saying, you know, Mrs. Koufax said, I think 3 words the whole night.
Sandy was a little special. He was quiet. He was a little shy. But when he was playing athletics, he was a dynamo.
Basketball was his love. I mean, he played it night and day. And he never wanted to play baseball. He just played because that was something to do for him.
I wound up in baseball almost by accident. There was a man by the name of Milton Laurie who had a sandlot team in Brooklyn, and I guess during infield he decided I should pitch.
My father said, he's going to be a pitcher. I'm going to make him a pitcher. So we have to get him to play with us on our sandlot team.
Despite his obvious pitching talent, Koufax gained local fame as a 6'2" forward at Lafayette High School. Ranking second in his division of the Public School League in scoring, he earned a college basketball scholarship.
For some reason, he fell in love with the idea of Cincinnati University, and just by the accident that the freshman basketball coach was also the varsity baseball coach.
I first met Sandy Koufax at the University of Cincinnati. Talking to him, he told me after seeing us play in Madison Square Garden, that was a school that he wanted to attend and play some basketball.
And really only went out for the baseball team because he heard that the team was going to be going to New Orleans.
I'd never been to New Orleans, so I decided I'd probably be a pretty good baseball player, maybe.
He said, hey, Coach, I'm a pitcher. And he said, Coach, yeah, sure, yeah. And he said, no, I pitch in the Sandlot. You know, I was pretty good.
I said, kid, the season's over with, I'll take a look at you. And I did take a look at him. And what I saw was unbelievable.
So they took Sandy Koufax into the university gymnasium where he was warming up with a catcher. And Koufax threw the first pitch over the catcher's head. And the catcher turned around and said, I don't want any part of this guy.
Despite its unpredictability, Koufax's powerful left arm began to get more attention than his jump shot.
A schoolboy sports editor from the Brooklyn Eagle named Jim Murphy had seen Sandy, and he recommended him to the Dodgers. And the Dodgers had Al Campanis go out and look at him.
Campanis said to me that there were 2 times in my life when the hair has come up on the back of my neck. The first time was when I saw the Sistine Chapel, and the second time was when I saw Sandy Koufax throw a fastball.
In 1954, Koufax and his hometown Dodgers agreed to a $14,000 signing bonus and the major league minimum salary of $6,000.
At the time, baseball had what was known as the bonus rule. If you signed a contract with a major league team and received a bonus of more than $4,000, you would have to stay on that major league team's roster for the first 2 years of your career.
My first 2 years, I just sat in the big leagues and really did very little except watch. And all of a sudden, you realize, you know, you're not trained for your job, and it took a while. I had not pitched. I'd pitched 4 or 5 Sandlot games and 4 games in college. That's it.
My first recollection of Sandy Koufax is in Vero Beach, his first spring, and it was like 10 o'clock in the morning, and Sandy's first pitch went sailing over the backstop, landed on the roof of the press room, clunk, and it woke up a 65-year-old sports writer who was in there taking a morning nap.
When he first came up, he couldn't throw a baseball inside the batting cage. Now, that's pretty wild.
He was just sort of a fish out of water, so to speak, in those first few years.
You would see spurts of brilliance in Koufax where you knew when he threw a fastball by somebody that they had no chance. I mean, they had no chance. The only way you were beating Koufax early in his career was the fact that he was walking everybody.
Koufax's control problems continued after the Dodgers changed hometowns in 1958. In 6 seasons, he compiled a 4.10 ERA and a 36-40 record.
It was frustrating. In fact, I asked out at one time. You know, I had an argument with Buzzy in the Coliseum. When we moved to Los Angeles, I said, you know, I want to get out of here.
He came to me in the tunnel of the Coliseum and said that he was retiring, he was going home. And I said, well, when are you leaving? He said, tomorrow. I said, we'll be in my office tomorrow morning, I'll have the ticket for you.
Bavasi told me that in the back of his own mind, he was thinking, I'm throwing down the gauntlet to Koufax. It's up to him now to pick it up.
Later, he came to me and he said, I've got to go back to spring training next year and give it a real shot. And if I still feel the same way, I'm going to quit.
He gets to spring training in '61, and he's scheduled to pitch in a split squad game against the Twins in Orlando.
First pitch, I think I called for a curveball, and it was a ball, and I called for a changeup, it was a ball, and then I called for a fastball, and it was a ball, and we had the bases loaded. Now he hadn't thrown any strikes, and I said, Sandy, what you really need to do now is take something off the ball. I said, lay it in there and let them hit the ball, and we'd get some outs. I went back behind the plate, and he just wound up and just said, here, hit the ball. Well, nobody hit the ball. He struck out the side.
And it worked out. You know, I pitched the 8 innings. I pitched a no-hitter for the 8 innings. And I think it was the start of my attitude changing.
Well, Norm Sherry taught him to relax his grip a little bit, relax his body, and he got complete control of his body to where he was a fantastic pitcher. Best I've seen.
I don't think anybody's ever had 6 years like Sandy Koufax had from 1961 to 1966. He won 3 Cy Young Awards when there was only 1 Cy Young Award given for both leagues.
Pitchers sort of have the unofficial triple crown of wins, strikeouts, and earned run average. Now, Koufax won that triple crown 3 times in a 4-year period.
Sandy reading signs into his windup, 2-2 pitch. Fastball got him swinging.
Catching him was like, well, we're going to kick somebody's ass tonight.
His mechanics were so pure, he looked like he wasn't even throwing hard. He was like throwing 98 miles an hour, you know.
Sandy's hands, if you look at it, could almost go right around the equator of a baseball and touch.
At the very end of Koufax's delivery, his left shoulder would rock back. It was like the recoil of a rifle. He threw so hard that the muscles were adjusting and pushing his shoulder back. And I've never seen that in any other pitcher.
He was snake-like. He was elegant and powerful. It was just awesome to see the twist in that arm, the tremendous power. Every ounce of strength that he had went into that pitch.
Koufax came straight over the top, which gave his ball extra spin and rotation and would give it that little flare at the end where the ball would rise 6 to 8 inches as it crossed home plate.
He had more than heat. He had that massive curveball. I mean, we call it a yellow hammer. Drops off the table.
Koufax ready and delivers. Curveball for a strike.
Marichal was hitting against Sandy one day in Candlestick Park. He's got 2 strikes on him, and Sandy throws him a curve. And Marichal swung straight down at that curveball while it was breaking down and hit his bat on home plate and broke his bat. And Marichal come back, he says, that's ridiculous, breaking your bat on home plate. He says, that's the nastiest curveball I've ever seen.
I couldn't hit him. Sandy would strike me out 2 or 3 times a game, and I knew every pitch he's gonna throw, fastball, breaking ball, or whatever. I knew it. And actually, he let you look at it, and you still couldn't hit it.
I just called Koufax a comfortable 0 for 4. Somebody asked me one time, what was it like hitting off of Koufax? I said, you ever drink coffee with a fork?
From 1961 to 1963, Koufax led the league in strikeouts twice and gained 57 victories. Then, in Game 1 of the 1963 World Series, he made a statement heard throughout the land.
There was all sorts of focus on that World Series because the Dodgers were coming home to New York. It was a subway series, except the subway ran 3,000 miles.
Just going in the Yankee Stadium, I mean, it's the aura or just the mystique of it. It's awesome and it's overwhelming.
The Yankees batting now in the 2nd inning, and the Dodgers lead him 4-0. Here's Mickey Mantle.
We started him off with one of the big curveballs. Strike. Then we hit him down here on the outside part of the plate with that good fastball. And he stepped out and he says, how in the you're supposed to hit that kind of stuff.
Now the windup by Sandy. He delivers. It's a strike call. The fourth straight strikeout.
He was throwing a curveball that day that was simply unhittable. He'd start that curveball up here and break down here for a strike.
The Yankees just left home plate shaking their heads. I don't think they had seen anybody pitch like that.
I watched Sandy get 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
Sandy Koufax, who has tied Carl Erskine's record with 14 strikeouts within one pitch of breaking it. And here's the 2-2 pitch to Bright. Is swung on and missed. Struck him out. Roseboro congratulates Koufax.
People had known that from the 61 and 62 seasons, the way that he had turned the corner. But to do it on a national stage like that was just remarkable.
Koufax followed his overpowering Game 1 performance with another victory in Game 4, as the Dodgers swept the Yankees to win the '63 World Series. For the year, he won the Cy Young and MVP after finishing the regular season 25-5. When he wasn't enjoying himself off the field, Koufax was building his mystique by pitching 3 no-hitters in 3 years.
Living in L.A. and being a fan and knowing if Koufax pitched, you wanted to be sure if you didn't have a ticket to listen to Scully because you never knew it was going to be a no-hitter.
And I could hardly wait to go to the ballpark when he pitched for us in Los Angeles because there was always a chance he was going to pitch a no-hitter. He had that good of stuff.
Then, in September of 1965, Koufax reached the pinnacle of his talent.
In his sensational career, as Sandy Koufax walked out to the mound to pitch a faithful ninth, where he turned in a no-hitter. But tonight, through 8 innings, he has pitched a perfect game.
Well, he was just right on it. He couldn't wait to get to the mound. He walked very fast to the mound. He got the ball. He got his warm-up. Couldn't wait for the hitters to get in the batter's box.
Sandy reading signs into his windup, 2-2 pitch. Fastball got him swinging. He is 2 outs away.
I struck out 3 times on 9 pitches with no wasted pitches at all. 1, 2, 3, gone. 1, 2, 3, gone. 1, 2, 3, gone. He was like a machine on the mound.
Sandy fussing. Looked in to get his sign. The strike 2 pitch. Fastball swung on and missed. Strike 3. He is 1 out away from the promised land.
You just knew when Sandy was pitching, you could be looking at history.
2-2 to Harvey Keene. 1 strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed. A perfect game.
It was the first time in my career that I've seen an athlete just have it all. I mean, just put it all together, just one time.
Koufax finished the season with a record 382 strikeouts. Meanwhile, his fireballing teammate Don Drysdale was also pitching with brilliance. Combining for 200 victories from 1961 to 1965, they were one of the most formidable mound duos in history, often taking the bows in tandem. By spring training of 1966, Koufax and Drysdale informed owner Walter O'Malley they would negotiate their contracts together.
The thing there that annoyed O'Malley was that they linked up. See, baseball had been able to, by dealing with one person at a time and avoiding any semblance of a union, they've been able to pretty much keep the game the way they wanted it.
It's basically, I'm not signing till Don's happy, and Don's not signing till I'm happy.
And Sandy and Donald came in to see me and said they wanted $250,000 for 3 years. I said, fine. So what do you mean fine? I said, $250 divided by 3, what do you got? And they said, oh, no. We want $125 apiece for 3 years. So I said, no way. So they held out.
They threatened to barnstorm in Japan and not come in. But Walter O'Malley knew the players had nowhere to go.
There are all kinds of crazy stories. They're going to go into the movies. They're going to do this. This is all rhetoric. And at the end, Walter O'Malley cuts his losses, signs a contract with both of them for over $100,000. Not as much as they wanted, far more than he wanted, but he got them back on the field and they won the pennant.
Whether we gained anything or not, but that was our statement more so than anything else.
More than his well-chosen words, Koufax's farewell statement was his last season, 27-9 with an ERA of 1.73. It is the finest swan song of any pitcher in history.
Koufax is sort of like the James Dean of pitchers. Dean has 3 movies, and they're all classics. Koufax has those 5 wonderful seasons from 1962 through 1966. He walks away from the whole thing at age 30. And the thing about him is like the sort of the gunslinger walking out of town. He doesn't look back.
When the Dodgers train arrived in Los Angeles from his cross-country trip from Brooklyn, Sandy Koufax embraced a new world.
He partook with a lot of the things that LA had to offer, the restaurants, the culture, the movie stars. Not that Sandy was especially flashy or man about town, but there was a time when he was dating a Miss USA runner-up and driving around in a convertible through the streets of LA. He would immerse himself in the culture and take what he wanted out of it.
Koufax benefits from being the first utterly charismatic strikeout no-hit pitcher who's really a creature of the television era. By the mid-60s, when Koufax was peaking, everybody had a TV. Every dorm room, every dorm in a college had a TV. Every bar had a TV. Koufax was photogenic. He was enormously handsome.
I had a little junior high school girlfriend at the time, and she was in love with Sandy Koufax. He's the cutest man on earth. And I was kind of like semi-jealous, when you're like 14. I'm like, wait, look at me, girl. She's like, oh, Sandy's so cute.
In 1966, his autobiography, Koufax, revealed little about the inner man.
He clearly has an interior sense of himself that goes beyond merely being a celebrity, makes you want to know him more, but it also makes him want to reveal himself less.
Celebrities in our society are eaten up by the public. And there are people who get satisfaction out of that. He was not one of them.
6 weeks after his retirement, Koufax went against the grain of privacy by signing a 10-year, $1 million contract with NBC to be its color analyst. It proved to be a bad match.
Probably Sandy Koufax's only major mistake in his life was trying to be a broadcaster. He was completely ill-suited for the job.
NBC decided he's the top guy, he's the big star, and they hired him to do baseball games. And the best pitcher in the game certainly had something to offer, and he had nothing to offer.
I'm of the opinion, Sandy, that you're Tom Seaver and the Mets today. First time.
Yes, it is the first time. The only thing I'm worried about, yesterday, I think every Met fan in New York came up to me and said, do me a favor, don't pick them.
Play-by-play men would set him up to say, well, Sandy, I'm sure you can relate to this, or what was it like when you were on the mound? What were you feeling pitching to some of these great hitters, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron? Sandy wouldn't bite on those things, did not want to talk about himself.
Sandy told me one time, I'm not here to tell you how well I pitched and how many games I won. I'm here to tell you how well that man down there on the mound is pitching or not pitching that well.
He cut a dashing figure on TV. It looked like he was made for the part, but just would not reveal enough about himself to really make it as a broadcaster.
In February of 1973, Koufax quit NBC with 4 years left on his contract and withdrew from the public eye.
The thing about Sandy is that he always was and always is and always will be a terribly, terribly private person.
I wish I could be as private. I got too much ego going and too much self-centeredness to get as private as he is.
And it's tough to get Sandy on the phone, tough to get his address.
Red Patterson, who was the publicity director for the Dodgers, didn't even have his number. When he wanted to reach Koufax for some kind of project, he had to send him a Western Union.
Sandy Koufax was so hard to reach, he used to keep his telephone inside his oven. Wouldn't answer the phone. He would have a secret code where you would ring the telephone maybe 1 or 1.5 times and then hang up and then dial back. And then it was okay for him to take the phone out of the oven.
Many of the Dodger family, the players, where's Sandy now? Well, Sandy living in Vero Beach, Sandy living in Billings, Montana, Sandy living on a ranch.
He moved to Carpinteria on the coast near Santa Barbara, a little small little town there on the coast near Santa Barbara.
He moved to a remote town in North Carolina for a little while, just for a little while, and I think that even that was too remote for Sandy.
Over 2 decades, Koufax changed residences at least a half dozen times. He divorced his wife, Ann, daughter of movie star Richard Widmark, in the early 80s.
One time I was living in Malibu. When I ran into Sandy, I said, Sandy, we're having this party tonight. We'd like to have you come. Sandy said, okay. And about 2 hours later, I get a phone call from Sandy Koufax. And he said, well, he says, I wonder if it would be all right if I brought my girlfriend to the party tonight. I said, Sandy, of course it'd be all right. I mean, who would have felt constrained to call you up and ask if they could bring their fiance or their girlfriend, except Sandy Koufax?
He's just a different person, which is a very nice person, you know. He's not complicated at all. Just don't with him.
I asked him the $64 question. The perception is that you are a recluse. And I could see his eyes bulge. I could see the steam come out of his ears. And he just looked at me and said, that's just a bunch of shit.
I think he just sees himself as, a very private individual who wants people to respect his desires as he respects theirs.
I was at the Final Four in Seattle, and I saw this guy, looked to be in great shape, and looked about my age. I said, I know that guy. And it took me about half the game of turning around, looking, that I realized was Sandy Koufax. He blended in with the people in the stands. He didn't need to be recognized. He lives in his own world, very self-sufficient.
Koufax's inner world was scurrilously violated in December of 2002, when an item in the New York Post insinuated without basis that he was gay. Although the tabloid ran an apology, Koufax severed all ties with the Dodgers because both the team and the newspaper are owned by the same company, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. The following February, Koufax visited the Mets at their spring training camp in Florida.
I feel honored that he has allowed me to enter into his world. But I also appreciate and understand his privacy. It's like strange because you want to go home and tell everybody that, you talked with Sandy today, but you also realize and respect that Sandy, for whatever reason, doesn't want you to talk about it.
He's been entirely true to himself throughout his whole life. When he's had the pressures of media, the public, really everybody wanting to draw him out and to know more about Sandy Koufax.
You were always aware that there was something in there you were never going to get to. It was always something he was holding in reserve.
His final game turned out to be Game 2 of the 1966 World Series. The Dodgers got shut out, and there were 2 fly balls hit out to center field that the Dodgers center fielder, Willie Davis, did not see and wound up misplaying for errors. He threw 1 ball away for an additional error.
When he comes in from the outfield after 3 errors, standing outside the dugout and waiting for him is Sandy Koufax to shake his hand, pat him on the back.
In 1972, less than 6 years after that final game, Koufax, at 36, was the youngest player inducted into the Hall of Fame.
I don't even know if Babe Ruth could be said to have the same impact on a single ball game every time he played.
Every time he walked to the mound in the early 1960s, you had the right to have a reasonable expectation that there would be a no-hitter. You cannot say that with any other pitcher that pitched in his time.
He was not the greatest pitcher of the 20th century, and he wasn't even close. I wouldn't have Koufax perhaps in the top 10. A career is more than 5 years. It's more than peak performance. Endurance, longevity count for something.
People object to him being rated the greatest or one of the greatest because he only had, 6 good seasons. But they were superlative seasons. Too much of baseball rating, Hall of Fame rating, is attendance records. The guy hangs around forever. Oh, God, look at those figures. 3,000 hits. Well, but how important were the hits? How important were the seasons?
I've seen some remarkable pitchers. Greg Maddux is a remarkable artist. Bob Gibson was a dominator. Tom Seaver was outstanding. Carlton was magnificent. But the man who stands alone is the most dominating pitcher I ever saw, without a doubt, and with no equal, is Sandy Koufax.
If you ask players of that era or anybody who watched Sandy in the 60s, he's a mythic figure.
before the World Series in the late 70s, after he'd been retired for more than 10 years, I believe he was 42, pitched batting practice to the heart of the Dodger lineup, to Ron Cey and Steve Garvey and Dusty Baker. And he was just throwing fastballs to them, and they couldn't even get the ball out of the cage.
And the first 2 guys, he broke like 4 bats. And I didn't see any aluminum around, so I said, you know what, I'll hit in the cages later. I'll just watch you.
A coach, another Dodger coach, ran out to talk to Koufax, who was a pitching coach then, and he whispered in Koufax's ear, and Koufax suddenly ran off the mound, and the other pitcher came out to finish the batting practice. And the obvious reason was, an hour before a World Series game, Sandy Koufax, retired for 12 years, is putting the heart of the Dodger batting order into a slump.
He still threw 85 miles an hour at the age of 50-something years old, but he never wanted people to photograph him. He never wanted to be interviewed very much. All he wanted to be was just another minor league instructor throwing BP in spring training.
By retiring on top, Koufax preserved our memory of his greatness and spared us the sight of his talents diminishing. Today, except for a rare appearance at a card show or a spring training camp, Sandy Koufax stays to himself, defined not by what he did, but by who he is. For ESPN Classic's SportsCentury, I'm Chris Fowler.